Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1990 holiday Christmas classic, Home Alone. Now, before I get into sharing my thoughts on the film, I want to give a shout out to Jonathan for sending me this film on 4K UHD Blu-ray. The film has never looked or sounded better. Disney did a remarkable job with this transfer, and I highly recommend it for fans of the film. It is definitely worth upgrading if you have the right setup for it. Now, what can I say about this film that hasn't been said by thousands or millions of other people? This is a classic. This is a wonderful, magical film, and it's a movie that, to me, it really finds the sweet spot. And a lot of films that deal with this kind of subject matter, that are a little schmaltzy, that have a focus or a tendency to rely upon certain feelings or certain vibes, it finds that sweet spot. And I think I'm not alone on that. I think it finds the sweet spot for a lot of people. And it continues to do so. And that's a testament to how successful the formula was that Chris Columbus and John Hughes created for this film. The film is considered to this day to be this classic, to be this runaway hit. But at the time, it wasn't really on anyone's radar. Nobody was really thinking about Home Alone as being the hit of 1990. Nobody was thinking about that. Even Fox, even the people who were working on the film, who were a part of it, John Hurt himself, he thought it was going to be a flop. So it's not one of those films that really, from the get-go and from its creation, screamed cultural landmark, screamed pop culture icon. But it just tapped into a certain part of American culture that I don't think a lot of other films at the time did. And I think a big part of it is it never really spoke down to its audience. It wasn't pretentious. It was simple and to the point, but the point was something that really spoke to a lot of people. The importance of family, the importance of appreciating your family, even when it's very difficult to do so. And the fact that it took place around the holidays, when there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of things that go on with the holidays, with the family over, that really does create moments like this. And how the film was not afraid to show the family dynamic as being fractured. It isn't a perfect picture. It isn't always pretty. And I feel that for a lot of families and for a lot of kids, that resonated with them. They were like, yeah, I'm Kevin in the family. Or, yeah, my parents are just like that. Or I have an Uncle Frank. And that just made the pratfalls and all of that even more enjoyable later on in the film because you're drawn in, because you care about these characters. In particular, you care and you sympathize with the film's lead in Kevin McAllister. The film does such a great job making you sympathize with this kid, despite the fact that, yeah, he is a little bit of a brat. He does the whole thing with the pizza guy and pranks him, and he does some other things that are less than savory, or let's just say good. This is the kind of stuff that would get you on the naughty list. That being said, he had moments with Old Man Marley where he's genuinely sweet, and there were other parts of the film where you saw that Kevin deep down was just a good kid who was lashing out, who was just doing these things because he felt like no one else would come to his defense. He just snaps. And I think that's a very realistic take on this certain viewpoint of the family dynamic. And the script by John Hughes just does such a really bang up job showing why Kevin would want to wish for his family to disappear. You can't blame him. Uncle Frank is a fuckhead. Look what you did, you little jerk. Buzz is a bastard who never gets his comeuppance, never gets punished. He's always the instigator, and his parents do nothing. And when he lashes out and tackles him, it's not a moment where you're like, oh my God, Kevin, what are you doing? No, you're like, yeah, get him. And then when he's telling his mom the same thing, you're like, why isn't the mom understanding? Why isn't his mom coming to his defense? Why isn't Buzz sleeping with Fuller and getting peed on? You know, that kind of stuff. It's just one of those things where you really do feel for the kid. And that makes it so much more effective when you have moments like in the ending of the movie when it seems like he's a goner. It makes those sequences genuinely suspenseful because you have learned to appreciate and to care for Kevin McAllister as not only a character, but as a person. So, speaking of people that are involved with this film, Chris Columbus, his fingerprints are all over this movie, and it's one of his finest works. From a visual perspective, it's a really impressive film. It captures this Norman Rockwell feel and vibe and atmosphere. There are a lot of shots in this that look like they are straight out of a painting, and that's definitely intentional. With the 4K release of the film, you really see how well this film was shot. How it wasn't just one of those throwaway comedies where they did a decent job with the cinematography or the direction, but they weren't putting that much effort into it. You have sequences like the shot of the church at night and other sequences throughout the film that really do showcase Chris Columbus's talent as a director. And one of the things about the film that is so memorable for a wide, a large number of people who have seen the movie is Chris Columbus's direction in the slapstick scenes, the moments where Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern are slipping on micro machines, getting hit in the face with paint cans, and so on and so forth. And the reason why those sequences are so memorable and so funny is because of the combined factors of the people involved, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern, who were really quite amazing when it comes to their ability for physical comedy, but also Chris Columbus's direction. He knew how to direct these sequences for maximum impact and maximum laughs. He had a certain energy and a certain approach to them that I really felt was so over the top, but in a good way. It was this cartoon zaniness that made the violence not seem like it's dark and it's disturbing. There are instances in other films in the Home Alone franchise, in particular Home Alone 3, where you have shots that look like they're straight out of a horror movie because the director doesn't know how to shoot them properly. That's what happens when you have slapstick like this. If you don't shoot it right, it's not funny. It's downright scary. And there never were any moments, even when Daniel Stern has a spider on his face, where you felt that it was scary. It was still zany and offbeat enough with the camera work and the editing and the cinematography that it had more of a cartoon vibe to it, and I think that was something that really benefited the film greatly. Because you could have had, if you had a different director who didn't know how to shoot these scenes properly, these would not be funny. It just would be a complete dead zone when it comes to laughs. And there are other moments when it comes to the direction that are really quite noteworthy. Anything that deals with movement, the sequences where Kevin is on the sled and he goes down the stairs, or when he's sliding on the ice rink trying to get away from the cop, and the way that he shoots the sequences in the basement, they actually feel very nightmarish. Like, you can really understand why Kevin would be scared of that furnace. Hell, I was scared of that furnace when I was a kid watching this movie. Who wouldn't be? Sounds like a demon from hell. But yeah, Chris Columbus's direction is a real treat. But so is John Hughes's script. Like I said, it does a really great job showing the fractured dynamic of families and how it isn't always perfect and pristine, but it also does a nice job foreshadowing future events in a clever way. And when it sets off these sequences of errors that lead to Kevin being left home alone, it's done in a way that actually feels realistic. It doesn't feel like it's rushed. It feels like something that legitimately could happen. And speaking of things that could happen, uh, this whole plot could not happen nowadays, which is why I don't understand what the desire by Disney to remake this film. Despite how popular and iconic it is, you can't remake Home Alone for today's generation. People have cell phones. What are you going to do? Leave the kid in a cabin in the middle of the woods? Are you going to remake Cabin in the Woods but with Kevin McAllister instead? I don't understand the the thought process behind a remake of this film. Plus, this never needed to be a franchise to begin with, and I'll definitely talk more about that later on. But yeah, John Hughes' script is a real wonder, and it's full of a lot of magic, just like the direction by Chris Columbus. How Harry and Marv wind up hurting themselves is sadistic, but also laugh out loud hilarious. And every moment of pain is unique. It's not like it's the same kind of pratfall repeated over and over again. There's a lot of variety to it. And I think that's what makes it so funny, is that you have the variety. And it's not just the same shtick. The way that it's not afraid to portray police as being someone incompetent or unreliable, or the way that it portrays certain characters like Uncle Frank. How many family films do you see that portray uncles like this? There are a lot of families, there's a lot of kids who could relate to Kevin because they had an Uncle Frank who would say the meanest things, who's just a jerkwad. I mean, the way that he tries to comfort Kevin's parents in one scene in this film, it's such an instance of tone deafness to the point that it's genuinely funny, but not in the way that it's like a joke, but it's funny in terms of how much of an asshole this guy is. You can't believe it. It's unbelievable. If it makes you feel any better, I left my reading glasses. Fuck you, Frank! You fucking asshole! I mean, really? Oh, man. And then you have things like John Candy. John Candy, he graced this film with his presence, his undeniable charisma and personality and warmth as a favor for John Hughes. And he improvised pretty much all of the lines of dialogue, including the hilarious dialogue when he's talking about how he left his kid at a mortuary alone with a corpse. And it's always a lot of fun, and it's always great to see John. I miss him every day. This world is not the same without John Candy. It's not as funny, it's not as warm, and it's not as kind. And when the casting was just brilliant to have him play this humanitarian, this kind polka king, this guy who decides to go out of his way to help Kevin's mom get home for Christmas. And from everything that I've heard and I've read and I've seen about John, I buy that he would do that. John would do that. John would go out of his way to help somebody in need. And that is something that I think a lot of people could use right now. Is the realization that, there are people out there that will help. And it's just such a great cameo by John Candy. He just makes everything that he's in so much better and brighter for the most part. There are some films that he's a part of that aren't really that great, but that's the same. You could say the same thing for a lot of other actors and a lot of other people. But yeah, just it's always a real treat to see John. And for a lot of people, this was their first introduction to John Candy, and it's a great introduction to what was such a great man and a great person. And speaking of great people, this cast is fantastic. Macaulay Culkin, no one saw this kid being this big star. He was in Uncle Buck and he had his moments, but it wasn't to the point where you're like, this kid's gonna be the next big thing. So when he was cast for this film, I don't think a lot of people were like, yeah, this movie's gonna be a smash hit. And then he became one of the biggest stars of the 90s in terms of a child star, and one of the biggest child stars period. For a lot of people, when they think of child actors, when they think of child stars, one of the first kids that comes to mind is Macaulay Culkin. And it's really a shame what happened throughout most of his career, how he was treated by his parents. But with this film, they really do capture lightning in a bottle with this kid, and with a lot of other aspects and moments with this particular story and how it's told. This kid is precocious, he's charismatic, he's likable, and he's also legitimately kind of badass. And I think for a kid to cross off all those boxes, it's kind of a difficult thing to pull off, because there's a lot of kid actors who they have the right look, they have some charisma, but they're not really believable in other aspects that would be necessary for this kind of role. He's also charming, he's also sweet, so he can be mischievous and kind of a brat, but then he can also be a real sweetheart, and he can be someone that is legitimately inspiring when it comes to really providing a way for people to think about things differently. For instance, with the moment in the film with Old Man Marley in the church, there's a certain introspection with this character that is not really something you see very often with kids, and probably for good reason. Because there are moments with this script where it seems as if Kevin is acting like an adult, but that is even a part of the screenplay. Like, Kevin, why don't you be more like an adult? And when he's left alone, he gradually grows up. He becomes more humble. He sustains himself. He's not as afraid of things anymore. He goes and gets groceries on his own. There's growth with this character, and I think Macaulay Culkin was a good enough actor to really show that growth in a way that felt very genuine. And he was also just so much fun to watch when he's going after the burglars. Are you thirsty for more? It's just a really enjoyable performance to watch because of just how much energy he gives to it. And Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern. Who thought Joe Pesci had this kind of talent in him? It just showcases how talented and multifaceted of an actor he is, that he could pull off this kind of role in this kind of film. The physical comedy by both of them is top notch. They did most of their own falls and most of their own stunts, with some exceptions. But as good as their physical comedy is in this film, it wouldn't really have as much impact if they didn't have such great chemistry. Originally, Daniel Stern, there was some kind of conflict, I think, either with the studio who didn't want to pay Daniel as much as he was asking for, or something along those lines. So another actor was actually cast as Marv, even though Daniel Stern was the first choice by director Chris Columbus and John Hughes. They cast Daniel Roebuck, and he actually got paid a good amount of money for the film, despite not actually playing Marv. But in the screen tests and in shoots and the dailies, Daniel Roebuck had no chemistry with Joe Pesci. And with these two characters, it's paramount. It's of utmost importance for them to have chemistry. And that's why Daniel Stern was given what he asked for and was brought on, and the rest is history. This film would not be the classic that it is without Harry and Marv doing their thing, without Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern playing off each other so well. And the rest of the cast is fine too. Catherine O'Hara plays Kate. Kevin's mom really flexes her own acting muscles here, shows that she's more than just a Second City television actress. She can really hold her own with different kinds of roles and performances. Devin Rattray, he really is a rat tray because he's so good at playing a despicable, unlikable older brother. Jerry Byman as Uncle Frank, the kind of uncle that you hate and you want to just smack across the face because he's such an asshole. And there's a few other actors and actresses, but for the most part, that's the main cast that I wanted to mention, other than, John Candy or John Hurd. I definitely want to mention John Hurd, who played Kevin's father in this. Despite the fact that he wasn't really that passionate about the project or didn't really think the film would amount to much, John still delivered a good performance and gave it his all. And you also have a really great and spectacular score by John Williams. One of my favorite scores by him. The composition, Somewhere in My Memory, is always going to be somewhere in my memory. It really does tap into the sweet spot as well. It's a really magical, wondrous piece of music. And there are other bits of the score that are equally as good. The score that plays when Kevin is getting ready for war and he's building all the traps, it actually reminds you of something you would hear by Bill Conti for one of his training sequences or getting ready scenes for a Rocky film. And I'm wondering if that was intentional on John Williams's part. What makes his score even more impressive is that it was a last minute thing. The original composer, something didn't work out. Either the studio or the director, they didn't really like the score, so they had to scramble to find somebody. And they lucked out and were able to get John Williams. And his score for this film, in a lot of ways, is the heart of the movie. If you don't have John Williams' score, I don't think this film is as heartfelt as it is because of how genuinely heartwarming his music is. And a lot of the other things about this film, when it comes to the technical aspects of it, really do speak to that heartwarming nature. The cinematography by Julio Macat, the editing by Roger Gosnell. And when you add up all of these things together, you really do have a film where pretty much everything works. All these pieces come together in a very special and outstanding fashion. I've seen this film hundreds of times, easily, and it's still as funny, it's still as heartwarming, and it's still as lovable as it was the first time that I saw it. It's not one of those things to me where it's just nostalgia speaking. This is just a great film. For what it is, it's one of the finest examples of a holiday family comedy that's enjoyable and entertaining for kids of any age, and I feel has aged really well. I don't think it's dated at all, unlike some people who like to say that because it didn't have cell phones. So what? Wasn't going to have cell phones then. What's your problem? It's got its heart in the right place, but it's not afraid to pull some punches. And I think that's something that also resonates with a lot of audiences. And that's what helps it still entertain so many adults, is because it has an edge to it. There's a there's a certain part of it that it's not intended for kids. And that's intentional, because I think John Hughes and Chris Columbus knew that. They wanted to make a film that both the adults and the kids could equally enjoy and have fun with. And that's such a difficult balance to pull off, because it easily could have been one of those things with the stuff with the angels with filthy souls, keep the change, you filthy animal. That kind of stuff might come across as being tonally out of place. But the screenplay and the way that the film is shot and the way that it's put together make it so it doesn't feel like that tone is out of place. It feels like it's in the right place the entire time. It's like the best Christmas present. The film is always worthwhile. It's always as endearing, as enjoyable, and as memorable as it was the first time that you sat down and opened it up. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of Home Alone, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.